I used to tell people I enjoyed teaching. It wasn't true, not really, but it sounded better than admitting that the job just kept me busy. Most of the staff thought I had my life sorted. They didn't see how I lingered in my classroom after hours, pretending to grade, so I didn't have to go home to a flat that felt like a holding cell. People see what makes them comfortable. I never corrected them. That Monday started like any other. Rain streaked across the windows, a steady drizzle that made the whole building feel half asleep. My students filed in with their usual mix of muttering and half-hearted chatter, jackets dripping, trainers squeaking on the laminate. I didn't have the energy for anything ambitious, so I opened with a simple warm-up exercise. Draw a character you'd like to write about this term. Doesn't matter who. Someone from a story, someone from imagination. 10 minutes. Pencils scratched. A few kids argued over coloured pencils. One boy tried to draw a dragon so massive it took up the entire page. Normal chaos. Comforting, even. Then my eyes drifted to the back row. Joel Watkins sat hunched over his desk, shoulders tight, tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. He was a quiet kid, the sort who apologized when he hadn't done anything wrong. I expected something gentle from him, a cartoon mascot maybe, a pet. But when he slid the paper to the edge of his desk, almost shyly, something in my chest went cold. The face he'd drawn wasn't fantasy. It was familiar in a way that made my breath stall. It had wide brown eyes and hair that fell unevenly across the forehead. A small, dark mark along the right cheekbone, a mole Caleb spent years trying to hide in photos. Caleb was my younger brother. We fought like brothers do, but I always told myself I'd look out for him. That night in the woods was just another argument that went too far, another moment I replayed so often it lost its edges. And that was the last time I saw him. 20 years since I'd last seen my brother's face. And here it was, in pencil on loose-leaf paper, sketched by a boy who wasn't even born when Caleb disappeared. I forced myself to speak, keeping my tone steady. Interesting. Who's this meant to be? Joel hesitated. His pencil hovered over the drawing. Then he wrote a title in small block letters above the head. The Boy in the Leaves. Something crawled up the back of my neck. Where'd you get the idea? I asked. He looked up at me, uncomplicated and earnest, as if the answer were obvious. He told me to draw him, he said, so you'd see. And just like that, the rain outside felt louder, the room colder, and the years I'd spent burying my brother's memories shifted, as if something beneath them had just begun to move. I spent the rest of that day convincing myself it meant nothing. Kids drew weird things, they copied each other, they absorbed stray details from conversations they shouldn't have been listening to. It was easier to believe in coincidence than to even touch the possibility of something intentional. By the next morning, I'd built a neat little wall around it. One drawing wasn't an omen. It was just a drawing. Then the class turned in their free write assignments. I was flipping through them during silent reading when I noticed a short piece from a girl who normally wrote about princesses and ponies. This time, she described, quote, a boy who stood under the trees. smiling a lopsided smile that revealed a chipped front tooth. I couldn't help but think about the chip Caleb had gotten from falling off his bike at age 7. My throat tightened. I set it aside and grabbed the next. Another story, another boy. This one described the way he laughed, quote, like he couldn't quite catch his breath. That was Caleb too. He used to wheeze when he laughed hard enough. Third assignment wrote about a boy who walked funny, like he had a stone in his shoe. Caleb had one leg slightly shorter than the other, but only my family ever noticed it. I felt my pulse climbing, but it wasn't fear that hit me first. It was irritation, a sour, hot flare of anger. Someone had to be behind this, some older kid spreading a cruel story, maybe a sibling at home feeding their younger brothers and sisters details about my family. Kids could be thoughtless. Sometimes their parents were worse. And beneath that irritation was shame, an old familiar shape that whispered I was being ridiculous for caring this much, that I was overreacting, that it shouldn't matter anymore. While silent reading ended, I closed the stack of assignments and addressed the class as lightly as I could. "These stories you've written," I said, "a lot of you seem to have chosen the same character this week. Did someone plan that, or did you talk about it beforehand?" They all shook their heads. A few exchanged confused glances. "No one told us to," one girl said. "We just saw him." "Saw him?" I kept my voice casual, but my chest felt tight. "In our dreams," another kid said. "It was the same boy," a third added, as if clarifying something obvious. I swallowed. "Okay, but why him? Why that face?" Silence settled. Then one of the boys, a small, nervous kid who chewed the sleeves of his jumper, raised his hand halfway, then put it down again. I coaxed him gently. His voice wavered. "He said to me that he used to be your brother, but he's different now." He hesitated, eyes darting to the floor. "He wants you to find him." The room seemed to hold its breath. I forced a tight smile, muttered something about imagination and recurring themes, and dismissed them for break. But my mind was already sliding in motion, gears turning the way they hadn't in years. This couldn't continue. If someone was spreading stories about my family, I needed to know. If someone was manipulating these kids, it had to stop before it became a full-blown rumor mill. So, I decided to investigate quietly, ask around, check for older siblings, see who had started the boy in the leaves idea. But deep down, something colder whispered that this had already spiraled, and I was catching it too late. I didn't want to go to my mother's house. I never did. Being there meant brushing up against memories I spent years smoothing into something manageable. But after the drawings at school, the whispers about dreams, I couldn't talk myself out of it. The drive felt longer than it was. My mother lived only 20 minutes away, but every mile dragged as my mind raced. When I pulled into the driveway, I was struck by how much smaller the house looked. Or maybe I'd just outgrown it while she stayed frozen in her grief. She opened the door before I knocked. She always did, like she spent her days waiting for someone who never came. "Evan?" she said, giving a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. The lines in her face had deepened since I last visited. grief calcified into bone structure. We exchanged the usual awkward pleasantries, neither of us addressing why I was really there. When the conversation ran out, as it always did, she led me down the hall. Caleb's room was still preserved, the way she kept it since the week he vanished. Posters pale from sunlight, trophies untouched, bedding smoothed as if expecting him to slip under it any minute. I stood in the doorway, half expecting to see some sign that the intruder from school had been here too. But the room was unchanged. That should have comforted me. Instead, it left a knot in my stomach, a strange little disappointment I hated myself for feeling. If something had been moved, tampered with, displaced, at least it would have meant I wasn't losing my grip. "Oh, something came," my mother said suddenly, turning toward her dresser. She pulled an envelope from a drawer and handed it to me. "No return address, just this inside." It was a drawing, crayon, rough, unsteady lines. It was of Caleb, stood in our old backyard, smiling, same uneven haircut, same bright eyes, same way he tilted his head like he was listening. My throat tightened. "You sent this, didn't you?" she asked quietly. "Some kind of apology?" "No," I whispered. I couldn't take my eyes off the picture. The timeline clicked into place. A week ago was exactly when the students claimed the dreams began. But something else nagged at me, a detail I couldn't immediately place. I stared at the yard behind Caleb in the drawing, at the clothesline, the fence, and the sloping hill. Then it hit me. The hill was wrong. In the drawing, the ground behind him dipped sharply, a small, steep drop. But our backyard never had that, not the way it was drawn. It looked like the slope from the woods, the embankment, the one from the night he vanished, the one I've spent 20 years remembering as gentle, forgettable, harmless. But here, in crayon, it looked exactly as it truly had. A sudden drop, a fall that could hurt a child. My stomach twisted. "Evan?" my mum asked. "What is it?" I folded the drawing before she could see my face. Whoever was sketching Caleb wasn't remembering the past. They were remembering my past. The real one. The one I'd never said out loud. They knew the place I'd spent 20 years pretending didn't exist. By the next morning, whatever thin veneer of professionalism I'd been clinging to had worn down to threads. I wasn't thinking like a teacher anymore, nor was I thinking like an adult. I just needed answers, and the only people who seemed to have any were 12-year-olds who should have been worrying about lunchroom seating arrangements, not the last night my brother was alive. I called Joel in first. He shuffled into the empty classroom, looking smaller than usual, like he knew he shouldn't be part of this conversation. I closed the door behind him. "Joel," I said, keeping my tone even. "I need you to tell me where you heard about that boy, the one in your drawing." He stared at his shoes. His hands were tucked into his sleeves, knuckle whitened through the fabric. "I didn't hear it," he said. "He showed me." My jaw tightened. "Showed you how? In a dream?" A hesitant nod. "Joel, it's important you're honest. If another student told you about about the boy..." He flinched before I finished the sentence. He doesn't like when you ask about him," he whispered. "He wants you to remember on your own." A chill swept through me, quick and sharp. Remember what? Joel shook his head rapidly. "He told me not to say that part." "Joel!" My voice snapped harder than I intended. He recoiled, and I forced myself to soften. "What did he mean?" The boy's eyes filled with a nervous, glassy sheen. He looked past me, as though checking the corners of the room. "He said..." His voice shrank to a thread. "He said you were there, the night he changed." My stomach hollowed. No one knew I'd been with Caleb the night he disappeared. I spent years telling the polished version. I hadn't seen him after dinner. We argued the day before. I wished him good night. A clean lie. A safe lie. I had never told a soul that I was the last person to see him breathing. "How do you know that?" I breathed. Joel squeezed his eyes shut, like he expected to get in trouble for simply repeating it. "Because he told me he remembers you. He remembers what you did, but he said you remember it wrong." My pulse thudded in my ears. Someone, something was feeding these kids details pulled straight from the memories I'd locked away 2 decades ago. My truth, the one I'd spent years suffocating. "Joel," I managed. "Did he say anything else?" The boy nodded, trembling now. "He said he's coming to school today. He wants to watch you teach." The words hung in the room like smoke. I dismissed him quickly, but I couldn't focus on anything. Every time I looked up from my desk, my eyes dragged toward the window. By midday, curiosity curdled into dread. I finally stood and walked to the glass. Outside, beyond the football pitch, just at the border where the school grounds met the first line of trees, stood a figure. Small, still, facing the building. Facing me. Watching. And though I couldn't make out his face through the distance and the glare, I knew, with a kind of bone-deep certainty that bypasses logic, that it was him. Caleb. I don't know how, but he was back. By lunchtime, the figure at the tree line had vanished. I stood at the edge of the football pitch, staring into the woods, half convinced I'd imagined the whole thing. The teachers milling around didn't notice anything unusual. Kids shouted, laughed, and kicked balls across the damp grass. Everything looked painfully normal, but the trees looked expectant, leaning in as if listening. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I needed sleep, yet my feet carried me forward anyway, toward the place where I'd seen the silhouette. The closer I got, the quieter the world became. The kids' voices dissolved, the wind flattened, even the rustle of branches dimmed, replaced by a subtle shift of leaves. A slow, spiraling motion on the forest floor, as if whatever had been standing there had only just slipped back into cover. My throat tightened. I knew this place. Not this exact spot, but the feeling of it, the sense that the trees were watching, holding their breath. The forest where Caleb and I had our last argument didn't look like this. It had always seemed smaller in my memories, thinner, less oppressive. But memories simplify things, especially when they're hiding something. A flash of that night came back sharp enough to sting. Caleb's face flushed with frustration, the way he threw his hands up and said he was sick of me bossing him around, me spinning away from him, fueled by resentment I didn't want to admit I carried. His footsteps behind me, my own anger smothering the thought of turning back. And then nothing, just empty air where he'd been. For years, I'd clung to the comforting lie. Caleb ran away, or someone took him, or something else intervened. Anything to avoid acknowledging the truth. That I left him. I stepped into the trees, leaves cushioning the ground, forming a gentle slope toward a shallow dip in the earth. At first, I thought it was natural, a hollow left by a fallen log or the weather. But the shape was wrong, a depression the size of a child curled on their side, fresh and undisturbed. Something had been lying here recently, or still was, just beneath the surface. I crouched, heart hammering, and hovered my hand above the leaves. The air felt warm. Then a whisper rose from the hollow, thin and fractured, drifting up through soil and roots. "You left me." My legs nearly buckled. It wasn't Caleb's voice exactly. It was stretched and frayed, as if passed through too many mouths, too many years of abandonment. I didn't think. I just lunged forward and began tearing through the leaves with my bare hands, dragging them aside in frantic handfuls. Dirt under my nails, sweat on my forehead, a pounding in my skull screaming that whatever I was about to find, I couldn't walk away again. My fingers brushed something smooth. Paper. I pulled it free. A drawing, crayon on cheap printer stock, fresh and unwrinkled, not a lick of weathering. Caleb's face stared back at me, but the proportions were wrong. The eyes too large, the smile too wide, stretching past the limits of human comfort. The head angled at a tilt no child ever held. But he looked older. Not grown, just continued, evolved in the wrong direction. And beneath the image, an uneven lettering. "I'm closer now." By the time I left the forest, my hands were shaking hard enough that I kept them shoved in my pockets. I told myself it was just adrenaline, the remnants of a panic attack, the shock of finding a child-sized hollow in the leaves with a drawing I had no explanation for. What I didn't want to admit was simpler. The ground I stood on in that clearing matched the terrain I'd spent 2 decades trying not to remember. It looked nothing like the softened version I described to police. A gentle incline, I'd said. I'd convinced myself of that lie so thoroughly that finding the truth rendered in crayon felt like having the floor pulled out from beneath me. The walk back to the school blurred again. My breath kept snagging on something I couldn't name. When I stepped into my classroom, everything looked normal. Kids chatting, pages turning, the scrape of chairs. Normal, normal, normal. I convinced myself the morning had been an episode, a lapse, something my mind could fold away. Then a boy at the front, the one who hadn't been involved in the drawings, muttered to a friend under his breath, "You always slow me down." My chest constricted. That was my line from that night. Before I could process it, another student parroted, "I'm not your babysitter," in the middle of a conversation about football practice. Then, at the back of the room, someone dropped a pencil and muttered, "Just go." I felt my stomach twist. These weren't Caleb's words. They were mine. These children were repeating phrases I'd shoved so deep inside myself that I'd believe they no longer existed. The walls of my constructed narrative, the version of the story I'd rehearsed and told until it felt true, buckled around me. This wasn't about the kids, and it wasn't about dreams. Something was bleeding through the cracks in my memory, dragging the truth with it. Then a girl who rarely spoke raised her hand slightly. She didn't wait for me to call on her. Her eyes were unfocused, as though she were listening to something I couldn't hear. In her own voice, but with an inflection too measured, too deliberate, she asked, "Do you remember pushing him?" My vision blurred at the edges, my knees almost gave out. I had to grip the edge of my desk to stay upright. She blinked, confused, as if she had no idea she said anything at all. That was the moment I knew. The problem was me. Something in the forest wasn't haunting me. It was peeling me open, forcing me to look at the memory I'd sealed shut 20 years ago. I couldn't keep pretending the past was something that happened to me. It was something I did, and something out there wanted me to stop lying about it. I wasn't going back to the forest. I told myself I'd take the day off, call in sick, do anything except feed the madness that had started tearing through my life. But morning came, and my body moved before my mind could protest, the desire for answers overtaking all senses. I parked at the edge of the woods like someone drawn by instinct rather than decision. The trees felt tighter, as if they'd grown inward overnight. The forest floor swallowed sound the moment I stepped off the grass. There was just the faint hum of something waiting. I found the large depression easily. In my memory, it had just looked child-sized. Today, it was deeper, wider, curled into the shape of grief I'd carried for years. I crouched, expecting the faint whisper I heard before. But the ground was silent. Instead, a sound drifted from above. A voice, light and uncertain, weaving between branches, trying to be a boy's voice, trying to be Caleb. Except, it wasn't right. The pitch wavered, the rhythm stuttered, the tone slid from soft to hollow, as if the speaker didn't understand what emotion went where. It was an imitation built from scraps, stitched together by something that understood the shape of a child, but not the soul. I froze, staring up into the interlocking limbs. Nothing moved, but I felt eyes studying me, practicing me. The memory didn't return cleanly. It surfaced in fragments, each one fighting against the version I'd rehearsed for years. I saw my younger self shove Caleb, a hard, frustrated motion meant to end the argument, not his life. I clung to that justification. I didn't mean harm. I just snapped. Brothers fight, kids fall. It couldn't have been that bad. But the next fragment shattered that excuse. Caleb stumbled over the embankment, hit the ground with more force than I remembered, enough to jar his breath into a sharp, startled gasp. His hand grabbed at the leaves, reaching for balance long after momentum had left him. I felt an old thought try to surface, the one I buried the deepest. He'll get up. He always gets up. You don't have to deal with this. Just walk, breathe, leave it alone. He would get up and follow me, like he always did. And then I saw what I spent 20 years refusing to acknowledge. I turned away because it was easier, because anger had hollowed out every instinct except the desire to be free of responsibility, because I told myself distance would make everything less my fault. The memory didn't condemn me outright. It simply showed the truth without commentary, and that honesty hurt far more than judgment. I felt hollow, a vacancy the forest seemed eager to fill. My breath left me in a rush, my vision dimmed around the edges, from a strange dissociation I recognized too well. The same numbness I'd cultivated my entire adult life to avoid touching this truth. The forest responded to it. The leaves rustled with a sound too deliberate to be wind. Roots groaned softly, shifting beneath the soil like muscles waking. The boundary between my memory and this place felt thin enough to tear. Something caught my eye. A scrap of paper pinned to a tree by a sharpened twig. I approached slowly. It was another crayon drawing. Caleb lay curled in the leaves, knees drawn up, the same way I now remembered him lying after the fall. But behind him, half emerged from the earth, was a long, pale arm stretching toward him, cradling him, comforting him. I pressed a hand against the tree to steady myself. The bark felt warm. I started to cry, an ugly, shaking sob that dragged out of me as if it had been waiting 2 decades for its chance. The trees echoed it back to me, and when the last echo faded, I realized it wasn't just copying my sorrow. It was learning me, preparing for something. By the time I reached my house, the shaking hadn't stopped. My clothes were streaked with dirt. I kept expecting the panic to settle into something familiar, numbness or denial. The emotional toolkit that had carried me through the last 20 years. But the truth was too loud now, echoing through every part of me. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, breath jagged. My brain scrambled for an escape route. I could hear myself trying to rebuild the same excuses I'd lived behind all my adult life. I'm not required to go back into those woods. Nothing is forcing me. People live with secrets all the time. I already did. I can do it again. But saying the words out loud only made them sound cheap, flimsy. I didn't believe them anymore. And the house, with its suffocating quiet, seemed to know it too. I wandered from room to room, rubbing my arms the chase of a chill that wasn't physical. The knowledge I carried, the truth I'd avoided for 2 decades, pressed heavier than any whisper or drawing or distorted voice in the forest. I stopped pacing. My thoughts split between 2 clear paths, both terrible in different ways. One was the path I knew best. Avoidance. Pack a bag, get in the car, drive until the forest was a rumor in the rearview mirror, seal the truth back inside, and let time do the burying again. The second path felt like stepping into fire. Accountability. Go back, face what I did, accept whatever waited for me in those trees. My pulse thudded against my ribs as I stood there, weighing them. The first option glittered with false safety. The second burned with everything I'd spent 20 years running from. Then, the tapping started. A gentle rhythm on the back door. 3 light knocks, a pause, then one more. A pattern I hadn't heard since I was a teenager. Caleb's pattern. The way he asked me to walk with him to the bathroom at night. The way he told me, without speaking, that he was scared. The sound froze me where I stood. I knew what waited on the other side couldn't truly be Caleb. I knew it was an echo, a mimicry. But the message inside the sound was clearer than anything supernatural. Choose. I slid down the wall and onto the floor, body shaking as the weight of the choice crushed against my chest. I can't leave him again, I whispered, my voice cracked. Saying it out loud made it real in a way nothing else had. I can't do that twice. I wiped my face with the heel of my hand and forced myself to stand. My legs felt unsteady but willing, as if some part of me had finally stopped resisting the direction my life had always been pushing me toward. I opened the back door. The night air met me like a held breath released. No creature waited there, no shadow, no beckoning hand. It was just the forest in the distance, patient and waiting. I stepped outside, choosing. And as I reached the tree line, pale moths drifted down from the branches, spiraling into a luminous path that wound deeper into the woods, marking the way forward. Walking into the forest felt different this time. It wasn't like trespassing. It was like returning to a place I'd abandoned mid-sentence. The fear was still there, humming under my skin, tightening the back of my throat. But that wasn't the thing guiding me anymore. Responsibility was heavier than fear, and for the first time in 20 years, I didn't try to set it down. The trees parted as I moved deeper, adjusting around me in slow, deliberate shifts. The forest wasn't hiding anything tonight. It was preparing a path, an invitation. The embankment appeared through the darkness, lit by a strange, sourceless glow despite the absence of a moon. The sight of it punched the breath out of me. Even without the imitation of light, I would have known it. My body had remembered this place long before my mind ever dared to. There it was, the hollow, the ground shaped by a small body lying curdled into itself, a memory pressed into the earth like a fossil. A voice drifted from the depression, soft and trembling. "You remember me now?" My throat tightened. The cadence was almost perfect. Almost. A half echo of a voice I'd spent years refusing to replay. I sank to my knees before I even realized I was falling. The confession came out of me like something being mined from deep inside my ribs, each word scraping on its way up. "I pushed you," I said. "I was angry. I wanted space, freedom, a moment where I wasn't the only one responsible for everything." My hand dug into the soil, clenching it like a lifeline. "I heard you cry out, and I left anyway. I walked away because I convinced myself you'd be fine, because it was easier than facing what I'd done. And then I lied, for years, to Mom, to the police, to everyone. To myself most of all." The forest responded. The branches overhead untwisted, the way someone relaxes their shoulders after carrying weight for too long. Roots shifted beneath my knees, grounding themselves now that the truth had been spoken. The air itself loosened. It had been waiting for this. Movement stirred in the hollow. Leaves parted as a small figure rose slowly from the depression. Child-sized, fragile. My breath hitched. The clothes were familiar, or trying to be. the hair, the tilt of the chin, and the face. God, the face almost broke me. Familiar enough to ache, close enough to believe, far enough from perfect that the distortions hit like tiny knives. The arms hung a bit too long, the joints moved with liquid smoothness, bending in ways that made my skin crawl. The eyes caught the glow of the forest, not on the surface, but from some depth behind them, like lanterns shifting through frosted glass. But even with all that, he looked like Caleb, and that was enough to undo me. Caleb? I whispered. The name trembled out, coated in years of dust and guilt. It felt raw, vulnerable, naked. The figure tilted its head. That exact tilt, that curious, soft motion I hadn't realized I remembered until I saw it recreated perfectly. "I waited for you," it said. The voice was gentle, no accusation or bitterness, just the truth spoken with all the sincerity of a child who spent too long alone. Tears blurred my vision, my chest cracked open. For one fragile moment, I believed I had finally done something right, that by telling the truth, coming back, not running, I had earned this, maybe even forgiveness, the chance to say goodbye properly. I lifted a shaking hand, an offering, a plea. Caleb reached out. Its skin was warm, human warm, its fingers curled around mine with careful pressure. And then it smiled. Caleb's smile, exact, a memory made flesh. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Relief washed through me. Maybe I really was forgiven. Maybe. The forest dropped into silence. It didn't feel peaceful. It felt like a predatory silence, one that falls when something stops stalking, because it's finally ready to strike. Caleb didn't let go of my hand, and its smile didn't fade. It only widened, just a fraction too far. The forest around us reacted. The branches stiffened, the light sank lower, as if pulled into the creature's chest. "You remember me now," it murmured again, but the voice was slipping, not entirely Caleb's anymore. There were tones beneath it, older, layered. "He cried for you," it whispered, leaning close enough that I felt its breath against my cheek. A tremor ran through its arm, like a memory excited it. I tasted everything he felt. His pain was delicious. My stomach twisted. Then, with something almost like affection, it murmured, "But yours has aged into something exquisite." I stumbled back instinctively, yanking my hand free. The creature stepped forward, and with each movement, the mimicry fell apart a little more. Its arms lengthened by inches, stretching smoothly like softened wax. Its joints hinged backward for a split second before snapping forward again. Its eyes brightened from within the pupil. Then a seam appeared along the center of its face, but it wasn't the line of an opening mouth. A split, vertical and clean, opening with a soft, wet sound. From within that seam, the true appendage emerged, long, thin, almost elegant in its wrongness. A proboscis like a mosquito's, hollow-tipped, widening and narrowing in tiny pulses. It curled in the air, tasting it, searching for something beneath my skin. Clicks came from inside it, like an insect readying itself to pierce. I didn't think. I ran, crashing through the underbrush, but the forest shifted with me, branches bending, roots rising, guiding the creature in a straight line toward me. It dropped onto my back a moment later. The impact knocked the air out of me. Fingers clamped around my wrists, pinning my arms behind me. Its knees dug into my ribs, forcing me into the cold dirt. Its breath trembled, marred with triumph. "Let me drink everything he left inside you," it whispered against my neck. The proboscis stabbed into my forearm. A white-hot pain exploded through my arm, but the real horror wasn't the puncture. It was the sensation that followed. Something was being pulled from me, ripped from within, siphoned and drained. And it wasn't just blood, but memories. The first tug tore at the night Caleb fell, his cry echoing inside my skull. The second ripped at decades of guilt, thinning it into threads. The next pulled at who I thought I was, my sense of myself unraveling like fabric fraying under strain. Grief drained out of me in hot waves, my identity blurred at the edges, my mind hollowed. I felt my limbs weakening, turning slack. My fingers twitched uselessly in the dirt. The creature shuddered above me, pleasure rolling through it in visible waves. "So much more than the boy," it breathed. "So much richer, matured." My vision blurred, black edges closed inward. I could feel myself slipping into unconsciousness, into non-existence. I couldn't tell. Then, movement. Through the haze, I saw something behind the creature. Small hands, small arms wrapping around its torso. Then pulling. The creature shrieked, a sound too sharp and layered to be human. It clawed at the ground, refusing to break its hold on my arm. The proboscis stretched painfully, still embedded in my flesh. The arms around it tightened, then yanked. The proboscis tore free, a spray of red following. A surge of agony lit up my arm. I screamed, collapsing onto my side. Through the blur, I saw a small, child-sized silhouette holding the creature back. The creature threshed wildly, limbs flailing, trying to crawl toward me. But those small arms, those familiar, heartbreakingly small arms, held it fast. I saw only the top of the child's head, hair I recognized instantly, hair I had washed and brushed on school picture mornings. I never saw the face. I didn't need to. "Go," the small voice strained out. I staggered onto my feet, half blind, half conscious, blood soaking my sleeves, mind in tatters. And I ran. Branches whipped my face, my legs threatened to buckle every few steps. Behind me, the two voices rose, one monstrous, furious, shrieking my name, and beneath it, small and strained, "Go." I did, and I didn't look back. I didn't remember getting home. One moment, I was staggering through the tree line, lungs burning, arm pouring blood down my elbow. The next, I was collapsing through my back door and hitting the kitchen floor hard enough to rattle a chair. For a long time, I just lay there, half curled, trembling uncontrollably. My arm throbbed where the creature had pierced it, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the emptiness spreading through my chest, a hollowness so deep it felt like wind can blow straight through me. Not metaphorically, something was gone. Memories, feelings, pieces of myself. I could feel the absence like missing teeth in my mind. I pushed myself upright against the cabinet, gasping. My thoughts stuttered, skipping like stones on water. I tried to remember the exact order of things, what the creature said, how it looked, the way it fed. But every attempt ended in a smear of fog, like someone had reached inside and plucked the sharpest thoughts away. But the truth of it, that stayed. The truth I'd spent 2 decades burying had sunk its claws into me too deeply to be taken. Something fed on Caleb, fed on his fear the night I left him, on his grief as he waited alone in the dark, fed on his abandonment I created. That understanding crushed harder than any proboscis ever did. I pulled my knees up to my chest, shaking, my breath hitched on every inhale. "I'm sorry," I whispered. It came out jagged, barely audible. But once the words started, more followed, quiet and broken, unraveling from somewhere deep and rusted inside me. "I'm so sorry. I left you there. I didn't look back. I should have come back. I should have..." My voice cracked. I pressed my forehead to my knees. The apology wasn't to the creature or to the forest. It was to the boy I failed, the boy who cried out after falling and waited for a big brother who never returned. For a long while, that was all there was. Pain and silence. But then a thought rose through the fogged-out places in my mind, uninvited. Those arms, those small arms wrapped around the creature's torso, holding it back with everything they had. The familiar hair falling across the forehead shaped by childhood. The way the silhouette pulled, strained, refused to let it reach me again. If that was Caleb, or even just some fragment of him, some last echo the creature hadn't devoured, then he did something I never did. He came back, fought for me. He saved me. The realization hit like a fresh wound opening, equal parts unbearable and blinding. My guilt didn't evaporate. It sharpened, grew clearer, but beneath it, something else bloomed in a way I wasn't ready for. A possibility, a terrible, fragile possibility. Did Caleb forgive me, even after everything? I didn't know. I didn't know if the arms that held the creature were him, nor did I know if forgiveness was something a boy swallowed by a forest thing could still offer. But I knew this. I wasn't alone in that clearing. Not entirely. I sat on the kitchen floor until my breathing steadied, listened to the hum of the fridge and the blood dripping from my arm onto the tiles. The silence in the house felt different now. Less like a trap, more like a question waiting to be answered. Dusk shifted through the windows and I closed my eyes. That was when I heard it. Faint and distant, coming from the forest far beyond my backyard. A gentle tapping, soft and hesitant, yet familiar. The same rhythm Caleb used when he was scared and wanted his big brother to come back. My breath caught. The tapping continued. Just once, twice, 3 times, before fading into the night. And I didn't know if it meant forgiveness or goodbye.